Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Powers. I'm an alcoholic from Chappaqua, New York. I know a lot more about my alcoholism now than I did when I was active as an alcoholic. I desperately wanted, while it was going on, to get some answers to some questions about it. And one was the question that Ken put the tunk on so hard last night. I was sitting out there wincing. As alcoholism bit into me, I made words about it because that's my nature. I'm a wordy type. And I did a lot of yakking and talking. But when it got worse and really began to squeeze me, it clarified and reduced the number of words. So I was talking a little simpler, just out of pain. And toward the end, when it got real bad, it all boiled down to one word, to which we all know that there is no answer while you're in it. I wanted to know why. It seems to me that as it got real bad, my chief feeling was one of amazement. I kept shaking my head after I came to after one really ghoulish episode after another. I don't mean messy stuff. I mean real weird stuff, out of this world stuff, you know? The incredible things that begin to happen to an alcoholic. It really isn't dramatic. Sometimes people talk about it that way, but it's just the second step is real good for me. I like that there's a nice word like insane for it. But as this stuff went on and as it got worse, I kept saying to myself, why? Why would this happen to me? You know? I didn't start out to be a jerk and a heel and a collapso kid and a guy that runs around scalding babies and this kind of thing. I was just trying to get along in the world. Why is this happening to me? And I found no answer for it in my own mind, such as it was. And I found no answer among the people who would still take the trouble to talk to me. And I was the person who did not get this program at first exposure. I flopped around in here for 5 years before I blew clear. And even the number of people in AA who were willing to talk to me had been somewhat reduced. And brother, you got to work at it to reduce that. But there were a few who still would talk. And one day I was talking to one of them, and I was repeating in a high, whining voice my little why. And finally, this dear friend lost his patience a little bit, and he said something to me which stuck, which I remembered. One of the few things that stuck with me at that time. Nothing was sticking. It was in one ear and out the other. But that one stuck. He said, you should stop asking why. The same thing Ken said last night. Because he said, as long as you're in it, you'll never know why. But he said, I'll make you a promise, based on my own experience, that of a lot of other people I've seen recover, and that is that if you ever get this program, and I'm one of the few people who still think you may one of these days, if you ever get this program, then sooner or later, I wouldn't say when, but sometime along the line, you will begin to get glimmers of why all this happened to you. But he said, don't hope for it while you're in it. And that did some good things for me. It did shelve the why thing, and it shoved my remaining very thin mental activity over into an area that's much more productive, the area of what. What is this program all about, and what do I do to get it? And then when I finally did latch on, and when the program began to deliver what it says it will, first of all, although this is not an explicit promise, it's so obvious it's built into the program, it delivers sobriety, That came to me at last, at long last. I'm going to tell you before I get through what it feels like to be a failure on this program. At long last, the sobriety was mine, and if there was nothing else to it, that would be a tremendous thing in itself. If there's more, the program explicitly promises to return you to sanity, and man, if you've been crazy and felt it, that's a great thing. And I was clinically, officially crazy, and believe me, when the sanity begins to seep back a little at a time, a day at a time with lapses, but growing up all the time, that was a great gift. And then on top of that, this thing called a spiritual awakening comes along. As all of that began to happen to me, it kind of lit up my life, not only in the present, but in the past. I could see better what I had been, not only what I was. And as time went on and as the power of this thing entered more deeply into my life, and I became, I believe, quite literally more deeply redeemed in the strict sense of the word, it was exactly like an influx of light, the light of consciousness, understanding. And as the man had promised me, a little here, a little there, I began to see why all this had to happen to me. Again, I wouldn't hope to offer the answers as to why, but for anybody else, but I would like to touch briefly in starting about what some of the things were in me that made me a sitting duck for addiction when I came into contact with this drug, alcohol. Because the thing that underlies the chief symptom, the thing that underlies the alcoholism, the runaway drinking, the addictive, compulsive, destructive drunkenness, is the thing that this program goes to work on. There are a lot of ways of stopping a rummy from drinking. You can put him in jail, you can put him in sanitariums, you can do a custodial job. The great trick is, what will make a rummy stop drinking and stay stopped and eventually be glad and joyful that he stays stopped? That's the miracle here. And the miracle takes place because the power of this program works at a far greater depth than the symptom itself, the surface symptom, terrible as that is. It gets beneath the symptom of drunkenness and goes down into these deep whys and what that are in all of us. You can't force it, you can't hurry it. It's not among the first things to be attacked in coming to this program, but in understanding oneself, at least in my case, it has helped me to see, well, let's put it another way, not why I'm an alcoholic, but what made me an alcoholic. Briefly, the thing that stands out in my life is this, as a prime thing that set me up for it. Somewhere between the ages of 12 and 18, I went through a process which, if I had to just put one phrase on it, I would call losing faith. I lost faith in three things that took place over a period of those years. First of all, well, let me tell you first of all what I mean by losing faith. I don't mean I ceased to believe merely in certain things. There's a common expression, I believe in you, in the sense of faith is what I mean. If I say to Herman, I believe in you, Herman, I don't mean that I believe he's sitting there. It means I have confidence in you. I trust you. In that sense, I lost faith. I lost faith, first of all, in God, and that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a gain. It felt real smart. I went to school and I began to think I'm a smart guy. That's a hell of a piece of baggage for an alcoholic to be lugging. And I thought, I began to think about religion, and it began to look pretty corny to me. And after a while, I began to come to the conclusion that the smart people today weren't thinking that way. And I put it aside. I see now that this was a central and deep lost, but it did not feel like it. Then along the line, somewhere there was a loss. Following that, I lost faith, I lost confidence, I began to lose trust in people. Again, it didn't feel like a loss, it felt smart. I began to develop what I have seen since in very mentally ill people, and particularly in criminals. I began to develop a very sharp capacity to see what's wrong with people, and I began to lose the capacity to see what's right. It's a kind of a blindness in one eye. The left eye can see like a hawk, but the right eye begins to go blind. And I now see that this was the creeping in of a loss of faith in people. The result was, I'll tell you about the result in a minute. I lost faith in something else. Again, I think these things are connected. I finally, toward the time I was 17 or 18, I began to lose faith in life. Just in the thing that surrounded me, the world, my own life, people, the whole thing began to lose meaning. I thought this was smart. I thought, how smart of me to see through this. How smart of me to see what jerks these people are and to get wise to them and to get ahead of them. And how smart of me to see that all of these fairy tales about some great good force upholding this whole universe is a lot of bunk, and that the thing really is a damn nightmare and a whirling chaos and a meaningless play of balls flying around in space. It's smart. But it wasn't smart. It's only smart way up on the edge of the outside part of something there. Down in here, something is dying when a process like that is going on. And it begins to send up a kind of smoke. And I believe, just my opinion, that any man or woman who goes this route of loss of faith and death of faith begins to breathe fear. Now, I knew something like that was happening to me, but if somebody had challenged me directly and said, Powers, you are a fearful person, I would have denied it sincerely. What it felt like was just uneasiness. I did feel uneasy with people, shy. They didn't look good to me. And I felt uneasy and I worried a lot about the details of my life. I would admit to that. And it was becoming a major thing. And I think, like a lot of the dark things in life which end up by being creative, it would have pulled me through as I grew older into some kind of maturity than I would have had in the normal course of events, a spiritual awakening. I think that's the way human life is designed by a wise creator who permits his children to run around and play games when they're young, but draws them back to the deeper truth when they get old. But about the time when that might have happened in my life, when the uneasiness, really to give it its naked name, fear, was beginning to bite me, I discovered the cure for it. Not the deep life cure, not the real cure, which, as we know, well, you can read it in the scripture if you want it, but we in AA know it even if we don't get to the scripture. The cure for fear is love. It would have been a long trip for me to learn that. But I discovered a quick cure for it, a chemical cure. You didn't have to wait years. It came in just a few minutes after you got the martinis in your belly. After I had a certain amount of alcohol in my blood, the uneasiness washed out of me just by magic. It made a difference in the way I stood, the way my back and neck felt. I just felt better all over. I could feel this tenseness that was normal letting go. And life, my faith in life began quickly, chemically, to be restored for the time being. And I began to have beautiful thoughts instead of nasty little snarling thoughts for the time being. And the other miracle of this stuff was it healed me in another department of my fear. Not only fear of life was dispelled, but after I had been drinking a little while, not too fast. Understand me, this only came after a few years of practice, but I would have 4 or 5 in me, and I'd get looking at the people at the bar, and I'd think, you know, they're not so horrible after all. And then And after a while, 5 or 6 drinks, I said, by God, even the ugly ones are so interesting. And after 7 or 8 drinks, just before I got out of control, I might even drop a few tears about how beautiful they all were. Unfortunately, this little glimpse of what I am utterly convinced is reality, this little glimpse of the beauty and bravery and grandeur of the human race, smothered as it is in its present condition, is bought at such a terrible price, the price of this murderous and degrading poison. And yet it was to me such a valuable thing that I returned every day to have my few hours in this nirvana where I was temporarily fearless and where people looked good to me and where I even would pass into the illusion that I looked good to them, the greatest of all, good. The trouble with drinking this way, I now see, I did not at all see it at the time, is that this is much, much too serious a reason to use a drug. There are ways of achieving these ends, of meeting fear and dealing with it. I now know because of what I have at long last learned in this program. But then it really seemed wonderful to just be able to get it by gulping down a few mouthfuls of liquid. The trouble with that is that it's not a gay business and it's not a fun bit. It's a killer. It's serious. When I first started to drink, of course, before I reached this point where the attractive part developed, there was some warnings. My body spoke back to me at first. The grace of God in the form of warnings is built into this early. At first, I could never drink without throwing up. Nasty expression of vomit. I mean, it's not nice, but parts of this aren't nice, and the act itself is even nastier than the word. The only thing worse than the word and the act itself is to assist someone else who is doing it. In the beginning, I used to sit down and drink my spiked beer very fast and get very drunk and give a few short, sharp yelps and then throw up. And after I had been doing this for a while, I got with one of my friends. This was at the University of Illinois, and I said, gee, you know, this must be swell stuff we're doing on Saturday night. But would you mind telling me what is the reason? Why are we doing this? And he said, well, I can tell that there's something here you haven't understood yet. He said, I've been watching you. You're not very good at it. He said, you haven't learned to take it easy. That if you take it easy, in between the time when you start to drink and the time when you throw up, there is a short interval of pleasure. And this is what we're out after. I went through an initiate of that kind where I learned to drink without throwing up. I went through the period then of drinking for pleasure, which I take to be the normal reason for drinking. I guess I have no experience with normal drinking, but it looks to me like normal drinkers are drinking for pleasure. And then I made these discoveries that I told you about that far beyond the pleasure. There were these tremendous benefits. And they were benefits, good, these terrific good of a release from my spasm, my normal spasm of uneasiness, for which I would not have recognized the name, but the fact of it was very real to me. And when the booze took hold, and I emerged out of normality into this beautiful alcoholic state, it was very desirable. It's a deep heart desire, I think, on the part of all of us, but certainly it was on my own part, that leads one into addiction. The trouble is, when the process starts, any of the drugs which will produce relief of this kind demand a certain penalty. And oh my goodness, if in advance one only knew that that's the way it works. Maybe it still wouldn't make any difference, I don't know. Maybe the momentum of it would go on even if one knew. But the penalty is that in order to purchase this peace, this relief, this slight glimpse of what life and what people really are, with this relief of the cramped ego purchased by the alcohol, which lets you out, and then wango does it grab you the next morning, because there's a hell of a reflex to it. The trouble is, in order to just keep even with that game, you can't use the same dose. You have to use a little more all the time. Here's a story that we all know so well. With rare exceptions, with the exception of the occasional alcoholic who is an alcoholic from his first drink, most of us have gone through this process of a little more, drinking for our deep reasons, whatever they are, a little more to keep even, and then up to the point where it's a lot. And even we begin to recognize that it's a lot. I, at one point, finally saw that I was really beginning to pour it down. And then I began to congratulate myself on my capacity. But then a little while later, I wasn't so sure of that. And the voice of truth in one, which never died, still would then begin to speak up to me and say, Howard, capacity or no capacity, it wasn't so pretty last night, was it, when we heaved all the furniture around in the front room and tore the telephone off the hook and threw it through the window because we're married to such a stupid dame. And then the police came, and the stupid dame talked the police out of taking us to jail. The thing in one which will speak the truth speaks it and says, how about this? And then the liar, which sits somewhere near it, talks back to it and says, well, and begins to smother this thing over with lies, to hoodwink and stab the truth over it, so that one can persist in this madness even after the red light begins to flash very loud and very clear, as they did in my case, long before I broke over into obvious alcoholism. I managed, by this process of self-lying, self-deception, fast-talking within, I wonder if this is the thing they talk about in the New Testament, the sin against the Holy Ghost, against the Spirit of truth, the being unfaithful to the truth within oneself, a far worse thing than lying to others. To lie to oneself and get away with it. It's the only thing I think that would permit a sane person to go on, to plunge on deeper into what is obviously, as Tim said last night, chaos, elements, life elements, mental elements, physical elements, beginning to lose the force of harmony, of coherence. The thing again in the New Testament is called logos, the power that makes things. That begins to be weakened, I think, perhaps not so much by the booze as by the lying, the deliberate throwing of dirt and soot on the little flame of truth. I don't know. Anyhow, there is this terrible momentum that we're all so familiar with, which again, I could not see this stuff as I was going through it. I only see it in retrospect. Deeper I went into it. All this time on the outside, I have an appearance of normality. I'm married. I'm very ambitious. I'm very proud of this. I now know it was another phenomenon of my spiritual death, because I had an exaggerated need for assurance. People had to give me raises. I had to make a lot of money. I had to be patted on the back a great deal. My poor wife was overworked telling me what a great guy I am. I had this drive to get ahead in the world. They were the two things in my life, ambition and booze. And for deeply the same reason. Nothing wrong with ambition at any kind of a normal level. This was abnormal. I got married. I started out in Chicago, moved to Cleveland, moved to Detroit, moved to Cleveland. By the time I get down to New York, I had been falling upstairs. In the meantime, I got fired from a few jobs, but with drunk luck, Irish luck, I'm half Irish, I guess I had half the luck. I would get better jobs. and outwardly I am yet a going concern. I do my work, and there are only occasional flopovers into real bad behavior. By the time I got to New York on a very responsible job, I'm drinking a fifth a day, just so life can be beautiful. This is not drinking to get drunk. I got drunk weekend. This is just running drinking. And for a guy of my body weight, that's a lot of booze just to run on. I made one serious effort before the blow-off came with me to quit. I knew I was addicted before I cracked. In the year before I came apart, I tried hard. I took 3 days off to do it, to quit drinking, and I found out I couldn't. I literally was unable to go through 1 day without taking a drink. And then I had a kind of a relaxed feeling about that. I thought, well, I'm a guy that's got to drink. And I went back to work to my quarter day or my fifth a day, and I drank for nearly a year after that until the whole thing caught up with me and the appearance of normality evaporated, and overnight one day, the first of a series of hard blows hit me. I did not become nearly in an alcoholic crisis. I hit a thing where I went completely out of my mind. I was convulsive one day. I lost all control of my mental faculties. There were doctors on the scene. I was knocked out real good indeed with a couple of hard hypos. And when I came to, I was not home in my little bed. I was in a strange little bed, and there was a man sitting at the foot of the bed. And when I said, "Who are you?" he said, "I'm going to be with you for a few days." And then I looked up and saw the bars on the window, and I knew where I was. I didn't know which one it was, but I knew what it was. I knew I was in the nut house. At this point, I would like to say something, again, my opinion, but I think that this disease proceeds by a series of events which any alcoholic would do well to try to understand the nature of. I think up to a point it seems to be fated in its development. Maybe nobody could do anything about it. I don't know. It seems so in my case. Up to the point of this first real hard whack, I don't think God and all angels could have talked me out of being an alcoholic. Just because alcohol and what it did for me was so terrifically important to me, and because I had become such an adept at lying to myself. But there again, and here I think the grace of God comes with a black glove on. I think this peculiar characteristic of the disease begins to assert itself. I wouldn't stress this so much, but I see it not only in myself, but in the lives of so many alcoholics. You can't say in AA after a while that it's only your own story. It's the story of alcoholism, because when you strip the details away, you can see some great universal things in this. And I think this is one of them. I could be wrong, just my opinion. But I think I see that this thing proceeds, when it gets bad, by a series of events, which, for lack of a better word, I would call crises. Alcoholic crises. A hard whack of one kind or another, and there are many different things that would precipitate it. This was my first major crisis. It believed me. It shook me to wind up in this nut house, because I wasn't in the trying out section, I was in the nut section. And they weren't at all sure what they had on their hands when I got in there. They weren't sure whether this was an alcoholic who was behaving nuttily or a nut who drinks. And I was mixed in with a bunch of real jumping jacks there for a while who were giving each other egg shampoos and drinking malted milk through their noses. And it occurred to me after a few days of being very disgusted with them that I was weeping every hour on the hour, and probably I belonged there. And there were a few days there, I would say perhaps 10, maybe 2 weeks, when my power to lie was reduced by the power of this crisis, and the truth spoke up in me, loud. And it says, powers, this isn't a joke, is it? It isn't funny. What are we doing here? And what's going to happen when we get out of it? The crisis, though, is a peculiar thing. The moment of truth has to be met by something from the outside. I know what that something is now because finally I met it. It is what one finds in AA. I don't think AA has any corner on it. I think the history of the human race is spotted, and what's a better word for it? It blooms with this thing in spots wherever it's needed. But you can pass through a crisis, and the truth can speak, but nothing, there's no culture for it. It doesn't grow, and that's what happened to me in this first crisis. And after a couple of weeks, I got taken out of Group 4, which was the violent group there in the Hartford retreat where I was. And I got put in Group 1. That's where everybody's all puckered up to be normal again. This was a very high-bottom nut house. My company was paying for it. And in Group 1, you still had a keeper, but he went along and caddied for you when you played golf. And then the crisis began to abate and to pass, and I lost it. I was given a lot of hydrotherapy and psychotherapy and vitamins and TLC. You know what that is? That's tender, loving care. And under the influence of all of that, I was overtaken by the alcoholic's worst enemy, health. I began to regain my health. And with it, this dreadful capacity to lie was just as if it had inhaled some life, and it began to squeak and talk and sound convincing again. And when the truth would say, well, Powers, it still has been a rum go. What are we going to do about it? The liar would say, well, we advertising people are the racehorse type. We have to have our nervous breakdown and all of this ridiculous talk at the level just above truth, where the liar would start. And when they spun me out of there, the truth was hoodwinked again, and the liar was in the saddle. He, the liar, had decided not to drink again, because they recommended it. So 2 weeks later, he had found some reason why it was a good idea that we should have it. This mad, insane capacity to persuade oneself in the truth, not of words, but of great big something fact to the contrary, to persuade oneself that it would be a good idea to have a drink. 2 weeks out of the bug house, I am able to do this. I can still remember the nut house, the flowing tubs of the leather vest department, the nuts yelling in the night and me yelling with them. And yet the power of this untruth is so great, and the lure of what the booze, the alcoholic's relief has come to mean. The combination of the liar and the deep hunger for this relief. I'm able to persuade myself against the voice of my own truth that I should drink it. And of course, the road down this time was very fast. I drank carefully for a few weeks. I was able to. I think the liar sees to that. I think there are two kinds of guidance on this earth, white guidance and black guidance. And if you're drinking again, you get steered out. Something goes out of its way to keep the way smooth for a while. It was, but then not so smooth. And the careful drinking turned into slightly careless drinking. A year later, it's a long story, I'm not drinking. Clinically, officially, not in the manner of speaking, but literally and actually smoking. Manic depressive psychosis. This time my company is not paying this rate. They say we don't mind if you take a few days off, Powers, or a few weeks to get your buttons sewed back on, but we think just as a manifest and an indication of your earnestness in this whole thing, you should pay it. So I dug up a little super snake pit to go through this time with my alcoholic manic depressive psychosis. just outside of Stanford where I was living, and they weren't so fleet with the TLC there. They went right after the bug house idea. They took the nut thing very seriously. They said, we'll talk about your alcoholism later, but we have a very encouraging treatment for nuts, and we think you should try it. Again, this thing is good for some luck. In retrospect, at the time, believe me, there were no laughs at all. They said, we think you should take this treatment because it is unbugging a great many of our citizens. This is something which later on turned out to be a very serious and a very successful treatment for different kinds of psychosis, and I would not like any remarks of mine to derogate the treatment. It's shock treatment. It turned out to be, when they developed it later, a quite humane thing. Later on in the course of development, they would give it with electricity. They would put an electrode here with some grease, conductive grease smeared on it, another one here, stretch you out on a slab, 4 or 5 people get a hold of you, and they hit you a jolt with the electricity, you go into a shock. And the humane part was that if you started to go into the shock consciously, they'd hit you another belt with the electricity, and out you would go, and the shock proper would take place in blessed oblivion. But at the time I got shock treatment, they were still pioneering with it. They had not yet discovered electricity, and I was given shock each time with just short of a lethal dose of metrazole in the vein. The ugly part about metrazole shock was if you started to go into the shock, I won't try to describe the shock, but if you started to go into it consciously and to scream out and to yell with the people holding you down, they couldn't give you any more metrazole, it would kill you. So you spat it out consciously, and sometimes it took 15 minutes. I had 12 of them, 3 a week, in 4 weeks. I was conscious in 8 of them. About 6 cc's of metrazole intravenously will kill you deader than an acro. I had 5 cc's the first shock. I had 14 and a half the 12th shock. I don't know what that did for me to this day. In certain ways, I don't know what it did physically. I just used to feel beat up afterwards, and maybe that's what I needed. Psychically, psychologically, I don't know. Whether there seemed to be very little to choose from as to the post-shock and the pre-shock power. But I can see now, looking back with the wisdom of hindsight and the wisdom of AA, that second crisis, these shocks, these series of shocks, advanced the ball a little bit for me. They gave me a little humility. I had to be carried into the last shock, not because I was sick, but because I was in such horror of the experience that I couldn't walk. And when it was over, and the doctor came around and said, shall we now, having treated you for your insanity, discuss your alcoholic problem? I said, yes, sir. Please, let's do. This thing cut me down temporarily to boy-sized pants. It utterly paralyzed the liar. And it had me talking right straight out of the front of my mouth, not out of the corner, for the time being. Again, the blessed disguise of the grace of God coming to us in the way of these seeming disasters. This second crisis really shook me open for a while, and this time I met the thing from the outside that was going to make the difference to me. This doctor said, I suggest to you now, first of all, I must tell you that there is nothing we can do for you with regard to your alcoholism, but I suggest to you that you go over to White Plains and join a group of people over there called Alcoholics Anonymous. That they're doing real good things with otherwise hopeless cases, which we think you may be. And I said, no, that wouldn't be for me. And he said, why not? And I said, well, Alcoholics Anonymous was described to me briefly in the Hartford retreat, and as I understand it, It's got a God angle, right? And he said, yes. And I said, Sawdust Trail, come to Jesus, right? And he said, well, I don't know about that. And I said, well, look, this couldn't possibly be for me. And he said, why not? And I said, it's because I'm so intelligent. I said, I've been educated in 2 universities. I can't undo that. We intelligent people have to solve our problems without these superstitions. And this lovely old man gave me a look out from under his spectacles, and he said, Powers, he said quite clearly, and I do not wish to dispute it, I see that you are a brain. But he said, we've had the brain now in the tank twice. So he said, just to please me and just in the spirit of experiment, in the spirit of science, why don't you go over there to White Plains and jump into the sawdust with these guys and see what happens? He said, it may be your only chance. With my newfound and alas, temporary humility, and with the doctor's pushing, I got to my first AA meeting, and it did a great deal for me. I met in the first AA meeting I encountered something that I have never found lacking in an AA meeting. Perhaps because my need is still with me. It is not that I was powerless over alcohol. I am. And I know my powerlessness more today than I did then. I do not feel it so painfully, but the feeling has been supplemented by the light of wisdom and knowledge that has come to me, and I know it now. And so I can see now what I saw and felt so keenly then. There is a power in every AA meeting, and I'm not talking about a higher power or anything metaphysical. It's something that so many people have shared with me, the experience of coming in here, of feeling somehow at home, and believe me, I was not an at-home kid. I wasn't ready to club up or join Rotary or get chummy with anybody. I felt this through a sieve, a cloud of resentment and resistance. I felt there was something real here. And I heard 4 people talk, and I talked to 10 or 15 people after the meeting, and it was perfectly clear to me that these people were sick in the same way I was, and that they had some kind of an answer that was working. That was crystal clear and terribly important. And I came back for more. And I got sober, and I stayed sober. I was sober for a week, and then months. I went to a couple meetings a week. I got started doing 12-step work early, and I loved it. I liked it. I guess it made me feel important and needed and functional again. I liked it. And with just that running around doing 12-step work and coming to meetings, what had been a crippling compulsion was simply removed from me. And even I was capable of seeing that something remarkable has happened. Because remember, I had had good medical help for a couple of years before I came in here, and I couldn't break it. And the doctors couldn't break it. And I had a lot of cooperation from people I worked for, my family, and everybody else. And now, just by becoming associated with this group of drunks, going to these odd meetings a couple of times a week, and running around at night saving souls, I'm not drinking, and I'm not having any struggle with it. 6 months, 7 months, I'm not only sober, this program delivers what it promises. Clearly, I'm sane again in a way that I haven't been for years. And after 8 or 9 months, there's something besides sanity. The thing I was looking for in the jug is beginning to come to me. Again, who said it last night? Jim, I believe. I'm beginning to find here what I was looking for, the rejoining of the human race, some sense of identification, some little glimmer and flash of this terribly abused word, but this tremendously important fact of love, of a relationship with people that's real, of trust, of confidence, the renewal of faith. Somewhere along the line, though, I made a critical error. I took the momentum of AA, I took the fact that I was sober as proof that some people could get this without the spiritual angle. Somewhere between 4th and 5th and 6th months, I began to think, aha, could it be now that this is the thing that a man could get without this God nonsense? I thought, these are beat-up types, kind of primitive types. Sooner or later, there will be some intelligent ones show up. Already there are a few. Might it be that eventually we'll see through this, and it will be as it has been with the human race. First, the dream of God and the firelight flickering on the cave, but later on we see it with all imagination. Now I begin to dream of a kind of high AA, devoid of this superstition. I could see myself unobtrusively playing quite a part in this development. The next part of it was I began to take it real easy on meeting, because there was so much of this primitive talk there about God. And the next part of it was that my AA was about 50% my ideas and 50% AA, and then a little later it was about 80% of my ideas, and then somewhere along the line, the liar took a deep breath and popped up and said, Powers, what would make AA perfect for you? This fine companionship, this wonderful new philosophy with modifications, of course, and an occasional drink. And if perchance it doesn't work, here's the clincher. What a clever dog the liar is. If it doesn't work, you're a success at this. You've been sober 6 weeks now. In 2 weeks, you're going to have a first anniversary. Have the drink, and if it doesn't work out too well, if it does turn out that you are an alcoholic after all, come back and be a success some more. Have some more AA. You've got everything to gain in experience, in fun. It would be nice to have some drinks again. Nothing to lose. So with the return of this creeping idiocy masqueraded as it always is as intelligence, I return to the jug, not by the route of the slip. Perhaps there are such things as slips. I'm no judge of anybody else's trouble. I only know that for me this was no slip. Maybe some people fall off this dock. I had to jump a little bit. I knew what I was doing. I deliberately drank again. And then it went very fast. It wasn't a slip. It was a mess, and it didn't take a year. In 6 weeks, I am real nutty again, and the men with the minnow stain are on the horizon. And so I began now to implement my plan, and back I come to AA, ready to eat crow, all hunched up to be humble, and I'm sitting in the back of the room at another meeting, ready to renew my success in AA. And I'm thinking, well, in 3 weeks I can talk again, and I'll tell them about my slip. Only in 2 days, not 3 weeks, I'm drunk again. And this one I didn't plan. This one just happened in that ugly, chaotic, unorganized way that compulsive things happen. It just happened. And it scared the hell out. And I come back to AA, not so hunched up to be humble, but scared and kind of hopeful. And then 2 weeks later, I'm drunk again. And then 3 days later, I'm drunk again. And a month later, I'm drunk again. In the meantime, I'm not going to 2 meetings a week, I'm going to 4. And then I'm going to 5. And I'm still drunk again. And then I'm having little nervous conversations, one of them with Tom Burrell one day. And Burr, a friend of ours, And I look at him and I say, you think it might have something to do with the higher power? Do you guys really believe in this? And they say, yeah, we do. And I think, God, maybe that is it. And I begin to make little experiments with prayer. Oh, they were funny, like Sputnik. And I continued to get drunk. And I thought maybe it was the 12-step stuff that did it. And I began to run around like crazy saying, be saved, soul, let me save you. And I had a lot of conspicuous no success at all because I made the ugly discovery with truth, so it can't be so ugly. That you can't give away what you haven't got. And you can't do 12-step work in AA unless you are a member of AA. And a member is not a hand that's cut off, that's just a chunk of meat. It's something grafted into the body of AA, sharing the circulation of AA. And I no longer had that. It wasn't in me. It wasn't in my looks. It wasn't in my walk. It wasn't in my talk, certainly. It wasn't in anything I tried to do, and just nobody got it from me, and that was very obvious. And I gave up trying to do 12-step work very properly. It's a long story. I got back to AA 4 years later. 7 more nut houses. For 2 of those years, I was so shocked, mentally, physically, morally, every other way, and in the deepest way, by the near departure of this deep logos, this power of coherence that holds a human being away together, by the near going away of that thing, of its releasing its hold on me so that I could see what it's like to run my life in defiance of God Almighty and in defiance of so near an experience of God Almighty as this program. This I saw and knew from very black experience. During all of that time, I did 2 things that were sane. I think if a person is ever exposed to hear that the regenerative power is never lost, I say that for the benefit of anybody who may be having an experience of it. If you have ever tasted AA in any deep sense, I think that's a deeper thirst than the thirst for booze or for life itself, the thirst for decency, for renewed life truly at the human level. This cuts deep, and it did with me, and it brought me back. During all of that crazy, mad period, I came back to my AA meeting. I didn't like to come back. I hated to come back. I sat in the back of the room, not humble, not fearful, but hateful, listening to the speakers. I remember Burr one night. I thought, Burr speaks very slowly. He'd been sober 7 or 8 years, and he was telling about it. And I remember saying, get it out. I'm a better man drunk than you are sober. This weird reaction, looking at people whose very sanity now became an irritant to me. God help us, I'm glad it's a minority experience, but those of you who have had AA and succeeded at it from the start can't imagine this dreary experience of having had it and then being on the outside looking in. What a mess! What a dreadful mess! And then this mad necessity that brings you back here, because even the liar can't talk it back, can't talk it down. You know what you are. You know what you've got. You know where the disease leads, and you know there's an answer here. And you come back. I came back. But it's sane. It's a flicker of sanity in the midst of real madness. The other thing is that somewhere, as a result of Burr's and Tom's testimony, and the testimony of other cool citizens who looked me right in the face and said, yes, I do believe in it, I continued to try to pray. Then there came a time when I did get back. I think if it had not been for coming to meetings and retaining some contact with this culture of AA, a culture is an environment in which a weaker thing can grow. I think AA quite literally, although I was failing at it and drinking, my faith in AA, you see, there was a renewal at death. I believed in the people of AA and faintly, in the possibility of a higher power. That kept me alive until the day came when the grace of God, don't ask me why, nobody knows the why, flooded in on me again. And I was a member again. It happened as a result of something I saw in Gotham Hospital in the week following Easter 1946. I had been in detainees for 4 days in there, and coming out, when the chloral hydrate was running out of me, I got a clear look at something I never expected to see because I thought I'd been seeing it all my life. I got a look at myself with the false faces off. Whew! They were on so tight I never knew they were false faces. The wise guy, the smart guy, I could no longer safely pretend to be a smart guy. I'm a wreck. I'm glad I can just breathe and lie in the bed and listen to my heart bang and wonder if I'm going to live through it. I can't be a smart guy. That mask is off. And the other mask, the success in business, the Madison Avenue character, all of that, harmless enough in itself. But for a drunk, these are the rags. This is the thing the guy draws around and huddles under from the light of God and from the power of AA. And the mercy of the disease is just before it kills the subject. It may kill that. And it did in me, thank God. I saw all that. I saw what it was. I saw that it stood between me and the very plain facts of AA, not just the words of AA, because in AA you get a little card with words on it and they're very important, but you get hundreds and thousands of people who are living the truth, and that's immensely more important. And I had lived in this, and I had somehow been able not to see it and not to hear it. But now I saw that I was blind and deaf, and why? And I saw that the spiritual part, regardless of the words for it, is just plain true. And I let go by an act of will, I don't know, or by the power of God breaking my grip. I let go of this phony, dead, terribly unhappily and murderously self-centered old self, and I passed through something like a death and into what was left. And what was left was nothing very smart. It was something like a small child. But it knew, even then, what every small child knows. You don't have to sell a small child on God. It knew that everything I had heard in AA from the beginning about a higher power was just plain true. And it came creeping back to its meetings, rather hopeful. I didn't know that I would make it, but I thought I might. I had a 3-month jinx in all that period. I had turned into a short-term periodic out of fear. I never could get past 3 months, and now I did. 3 months sober, 4, 5, 6, and somewhere about 7 or 8 months, I hit a very frantic period. I could not endure to think of the fact that I might actually be making this thing again, that I might be grafted in to this society again, that I might be regaining my membership, that my circulation might be restored. It gave me the fits to think of it. I was so terrified of another failure. And that's when the 24-hour program was a godsend. I just lived one day at a time. And when the thought came up, is it or isn't it? Are you making it or not? I thought, God, just let me live today. Don't let me think about those things. The simple power of this program, the immense life-saving power of a thing like living one day at a time. At last, I appreciated it. And then sometime, it was past a year, and I'm going to close now in just a minute. I sat in a meeting one night, and I was not raising the question with myself. For a few minutes, I was listening to somebody talk, listening, looking, taking in the meaning of another human being. I was receiving into myself the power that comes from being able to see and hear in AA. It's just as like a transfusion of literal blood because it means life itself. I was taken out of myself. I wasn't thinking of Tom Powers. I had a blessed few moments, it'll tell me for a moment at first, of respite. I was genuinely interested in another human being. And out of that release, in that quiet period within me, suddenly it came to me, I am back. I am a member here again. It was a gift, the realization, not the answer to a question. I wasn't asking why. I just suddenly knew that I was back there. Not that I had it made. None of us have it made. But I knew that I was enjoying again for so long as of my free will I should choose to keep it. This utterly miraculous protection that we all share against this deadly and relentless enemy. And then there was just one great big why that I got an answer to, and I'm going to end with this. The one thing that seemed to me absolutely incomprehensible, I thought, how, after a year of sobriety, could I have gone these 4 mad, crazy, wasted, destructive years? Because I was 5 years when I dried up again before I got my physical health back. Believe me, they don't kill 2 fatted calves for the prodigal. You better do it the first time, or the second time it's on your knees, brother. I sweat hard coming back, but thank God, the thing is not how hard you sweat. It is that you are a member, and you are back, and you're on the way back. The thing I couldn't understand is how could I have lived for 4 years in the midst of this thing, sane enough somehow to go to meetings, and not gotten it. I got an answer to that. It was an answer for me. I don't know what it will say to you. On the advice of my sponsor, I began to do something that I had been advised to do many times by him and never done. Now I did it. I began to read a little bit every day, just for 4 or 5 minutes, in an old book, the Bible. And in there was a description of a little old spiritual group. They were starting up in a little hick section of the end of the Mediterranean there up north of Judea. And like all spiritual groups, some of the people who were trying it were getting it and some weren't. And some of the boys that were getting it went to the founder man, the head man, and they said, "What's with these guys who aren't getting it? What's the matter with them?" And he said a strange thing to them. He said they've got eyes, but they can't see. And they got ears, but they can't hear. And then he said to them, "But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and blessed are your ears, for they hear." And it came to me, that's my answer. That old saying, not an old saying, a timeless saying, an ageless saying, is fulfilled in my own very life. And I share the equally great privilege of seeing it fulfilled again and again in the life of every man and woman who finds his or her place in this beloved community of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.